So I'm going to start. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to be here as usual, especially since the topic we're talking about today, I've actually asked Israelis if they've ever been there. So they said, yeah, of course we've been there. And then when I tell them the specific area of where I'm asking, which I'll mention in a few minutes, no, I've never been. And I get surprised that people from America don't automatically go straight there. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised that people that live here don't go there either. So I hope to introduce you today to a wonderful, wonderful new place in Eretz Yisrael that is directly connected to this week's parasha. So I'm going to share my screen and we will begin. Once again, thank you for joining. I think what a wonderful way to start the morning learning Torah, learning about Eretz Yisrael. And let us begin. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. The statue you see in the picture, I would pass by a lot in my old apartment when I'd be on the bus or walking. I'd always pass by it and look out. And I would shriek with joy every time I saw it because I said, wow, look how cool. Now, there was no name posted to the statue. However, you look at it and it immediately reminds you of something. Every time I saw the statue, I'd say, oh, look, there's Yaakov's ladder from his dream, Sulam Yaakov. And I always thought how unique it was that the city decided to put something like this here because automatically you see it and it connects you to the Torah. And that's one of the wonderful things I love about living in Eretz Yisrael, that you're automatically connected to the Torah so often without even having to try hard. This statue behind it, you can't see, is a park for kids. So you're playing in the park and you're reminded of Sulam Yaakov. Also, another very creative thing which I want to point out, which leave it to the Israelis to think of. Here's another close-up. If you look at the way they did the statue, you can't climb it. If they reverse, you'd be able to climb it. Why? Because Israelis love climbing things. I get surprised seeing how creative the kids are and how daring they are. So I can only imagine how many children would climb up of this, but because they made it reversed, it's actually impossible to climb. So now, if they're choosing Sulam Yaakov to just put randomly in a park as a statue, it must mean that it has something significant to do. And this week's parasha, right when we open, we read about Yaakov's dream with his ladder. And throughout Jewish history, it's something that's always spoken about. And if you do a Google search, Jacob's ladder or Sulam Yaakov, there's tons and tons and tons of pictures. So what is it about Yaakov and his dream that it's always being depicted and shared and spoken about? So that's one question I have now. And the larger questions I want to discover are, where is the site where Yaakov had his dream? And luckily for us, the Torah tells us exactly where it was. So that helps, but then we have to figure out where in that area. Like if I said something happens in Jerusalem, Jerusalem's a big place. Where in Jerusalem? So that's one of the things that I'd like to discover with you today. The second question I'd like to answer is, what is the deeper meaning in identifying the site? Okay, we found it. I can say this is where Yaakov had his dream. So what? And there is a big so what, which we're going to answer. And the third, as always, is I'd love to discover a new place in Israel with you. My dream is to take a group there. Up until a few years ago, they didn't really have bathrooms there, which I think is one of the reasons why people visited less. But I think it's one of the most incredible places, and that you will see with me. So first, let's start out by looking at the Pesukim in this week's parasha. So Yaakov leaves Beersheba and he goes to Haran and he takes rocks from the place. And I actually, in my Google search for Yaakov's dream, this picture that you see is my favorite one by far. And if I remember, we'll go back to it at the end of the class and we'll see why I think the artist did such a great job over here. So Yaakov takes rocks from the place, he puts it under his head and he has a dream. And the dream is that there's a ladder standing on the ground, its head is reaching the sky, and there are angels going up and down the ladder. So that's his basic dream. We're going to be discussing more Pesukim as we go on, but this is enough for right now. Now, Yaakov, he wakes up and he says, this must be the entranceway to heaven. And the key point, which is going to help us in our discovery of where it is Yaakov calls the place Bet El. And Luz was the previous name. So if it says that Yaakov had his dream in Bet El, what do we need to figure out? Where is Bet El? And if we Google map it, Jerusalem, 46-minute drive, we get to a place called Bet El, and named such after Yaakov naming the place. Okay, so that helps us. We know how to get there somewhat. But where exactly in Bet El? How do we know we have the right place? Bet El was founded in 1977. Now, Eretz Yisrael was given to us by Kadosh Baruch Hu and is all ours, every single piece of it. But we didn't always have communities in every piece. And after the 1967-day war, and we spoke about in previous classes what it means to get Yehuda and Shomron, when we got Yehuda and Shomron back, the Jewish people decided we want to make a community in Bet El, because after all, Yaakov had his dream there. Let's go and live there. In 1997, it was founded. And the people living in Bet El, they wanted to know, okay, well, we came here because we know that Yaakov had his dream here. But where is the site of Yaakov's dream? And they asked this question to a researcher and investigator named Ze'ev Vilnai. We're going to see right now in this picture. They asked him, Ze'ev Vilnai came to visit. They said, do you know where is the actual site where Yaakov had his dream? Because they didn't know. And so there was an identification previously by another investigator. Ze'ev Vilnai didn't buy it. He said, the reasons why you think this is the site of Yaakov's dream, I don't think that's sufficient. So he wants to now discover what he thinks. So what does he do? He decides to approach the quest in a very basic way. He goes to the local Arab population and he asks them that are living nearby. Near Bet El, there's an Arab neighborhood called Bitin, which is very, very similar name. And he asks them, do you have a makom mukadas, which means you have a makom kadosh in this area? Because oftentimes in Israel, we'll say that one of the ways we know that a place is a place that is really, really where it happened is if the name is similar, the Arabs have a similar name, Bitin and Bet El is similar. And if there's traditions in all the religions dating back thousands of years, most probably it's based on something. A guy probably didn't just make up and say, hey, let's make this a holy place. It was based on something. So we asked the local Arabs, is there a holy area in over here? And they say yes. And they take him to this place, which this photograph is very, very recent. It could have been taken yesterday. I took it 2 years ago. They take him to a place called Makam Sheikh Abdallah. Now it reminds me of a grave. It looks a little bit like it, but it's not. It's a place where they would go and they would pray. And even in Ze'ev Vilnai's time, the Muslims would go and pray there. And I want to show you what it looks like inside. And I want you to notice, so over here, it's really great. You have signs that are explaining what it is. So you can actually go to this place without a guide because the signs really are great. So I want you to notice this huge rock over here. Keep that in mind. Now let's zoom in. This is where they take him. What you're looking at, so there's two areas. You have this domed area and then this open archway. And what the domed area is, if we go inside, you have something, I don't know if you've ever been inside a mosque, but mosques all over the world, they have a lot of very similar features. Every mosque has on the southern wall, this niche in the wall, it's called the mihrab, and it's always facing south. And that, well, in Israel, it's always facing south because the Muslims pray towards Mecca, and in Israel, that's south. And when the Muslims come and pray and they want to know which way to face, they look for the wall and they look for the hole in the wall, and that's how they know. So if you go inside this room, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see this hole in the wall because Muslims used to pray inside. Now, what's the second? And this is dating back 1,000 years. So it's a really, really old tradition that the Muslims have for this being a holy site. Now, we don't know why, but it's a holy site to them. Now, what's this? The second area over here. This is, here's a more zoomed in picture. It's still hard to see because it's shady, but it's open. There's not much in there. This is a remainder of a chapel from the time of the Crusades. So we have the Muslims that they have a holy place of prayer, and the Crusaders also, they came, they said, let's build a church here, and this is what remains. So that's what Ze'ev Vilnai finds when he comes here. So if to summarize what we have so far, why do we think this is a holy site? We have a Muslim tradition dating back 1,000 years. We have a Christian tradition dating back. What about a Jewish tradition? do we have a tradition that the Jews have, that this is the site of Yaakov's dream? I just also want to comment while I'm at it on the symbols that I picked. For the Muslim tradition, you see this moon and the star. So a lot of times, if you look at mosques, they have a moon on top. Harabai, the golden dome, it's a circle, but I think it's supposed to be the half moon. Christian tradition, we know the cross. And Jewish tradition, I actually didn't put a Jewish star because the most ancient symbol for Jewish people is actually menorah. And if we go to shuls and look at mosaics from the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, they don't have Jewish stars. That was only introduced much later. They have menorah. So that's what I chose, just a side note to include. Now, before we get to, is there a Jewish tradition that this specific area is holy? I want to tell you that there's a tradition from the natural environment. What does that mean? If you go to the specific area in Bet El that's depicted, so I showed you where we have this part of a church and the holy Muslim prayer site, you will also see this really, really old tree that's about 1,000 years old, which is one of the oldest trees in Israel today. And you notice on the tree how this tons of supports because they don't want the tree to fall. And this tree is called, in Hebrew, Alon Tola, Lapo oak in English. And this is not the only old tree of the kind. If you walk around in the area, you see not as old 1,000 years, but there's many more trees that are really, really old. Okay, so what? So what if there's old trees? Well, the Muslims do not cut down the trees in holy areas to them. So if you have this tree there for that many years, it's because they say, this is a holy site to us, and we don't want to cut down the trees. So just from looking around and this, I'm going to use the word theory, but not really a theory, that old trees mean important places. There's other places in Israel as well that have really ancient trees, and there's holy sites. That's a way even to find holy sites. So just naturally walking around, you're looking, you see a lot of ancient trees. Okay, so I want to add that to our proofs. And I want to ask, why did the Muslims and Christians declare this a holy site? Now, if you ask Ze'evel Na'ives, he would say, because there's an even older Jewish tradition that identified the site as the site of Yaakov's dream. Now, on what basis is the Ze'evel Na'i saying that the Christians and the Muslims got their tradition for this being a holy site from a Jewish tradition? Well, he decides, let me walk around a little bit and look at the area and see what's there. And what he finds are dozens and dozens of burial caves dating back to the time of the second Bet HaMikdash. Now, Jews like being buried in holy places. For example, Har HaZetim in Jerusalem, which is the oldest still functioning cemetery in the world, has graves dating back to the first Bet HaMikdash, and there's still people that would be burying there today. Why do people want to be buried in Har HaZetim? Because they want to be close to Har HaBayit. Hebron, right near Me'arat HaMachpelah, and even in the building today of Me'arat HaMachpelah, there's people buried there. Why do Jews want to, even non-Jews, why do they want to be buried there? Because it's a holy site. So if Ze'evel Na'i walks around and he sees from the time of the second Beit HaMikdash in this small little area, dozens and dozens of burial caves, he says, it must be that the Jews knew something too. Now, there was a later investigation, and they found that not only that there weren't dozens of burial caves, there were hundreds of burial caves. And God willing, when you come to Israel and you go to Bet El, you'll see we're not talking about a crazy amount of land. It's not like it goes as far as the eye could see. You could sit and walk around the perimeter of the area. And that means the Jews must know something. They must have a reason that this is a holy site for them. So that's one thing. Jews like being buried near holy sites. Is there more? Or is the Jewish tradition based on anything else? Or is it just these burial caves? It means the Jews must have known something. There is more. I want you to look at this picture in front of you on the screen and notice that you have all these small rocks that they form a square. Now, when you have rocks piled on top of each other, it's not by accident. The nature didn't just place it that way. It happened on purpose by human hands. And if you measure the dimensions of this area, The dimensions are almost identical to the dimensions of the Mishkan. The Mishkan, which was the portable Beit HaMikdash, the dimensions are mentioned in the Torah. 15 meters by 10 meters is what this measures. So okay, so we have rocks that are the dimensions of a mikdash. Well, if we think of the Navi that we know, and this is why it's so amazing to know Tanakh, because then you could really put things together. In Sefer Melachim, we have one of the kings of Israel. Originally, we have David HaMelech, united. Shlomo HaMelech rules over the whole Israel. And then when Shlomo HaMelech dies, the kingdom is divided into two. Malchut Yehuda on the south and Malchut Yisrael up north. And one of the first ruler of Malchut Yisrael, Yerovam, he said, I'm afraid that on the Shalosh Legalim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the Jewish people are going to go to the Beit HaMikdash, and I'm going to lose their loyalty. So I need to put a stop to this. So what does he do? Let's open up the Pesukim. So the king, who's Yerovam, doesn't say here, I didn't include that pasuk. He speaks to his advisors, and he makes 2 golden calves, and he tells the people, don't go all the way up to Jerusalem. And where does he put the calves? He puts one in Bet El, which is right here, and he puts one in Dan, which is all the way at the north of the country. Another amazing place to go and visit. You could see today in Dan where the remains of his altar was that he did. So based on the way that the stones are built, and here's more of a zoomed in, I want you to notice that on the 2 outer ridges, it's a little bit blurry, but there's big stones, and inside there's all little stones that fill in. And this is how they built in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash. They just took random stones and they would fill it up. They didn't have organized building. Another example, if anyone's familiar, in Yerushalayim, they have a wall called the Chomah Rechava, that Chizkiyahu HaMelech built. You could see it today, walking randomly in the Jewish quarter, you could find it. And the wall is very, very similar. All little stones with big ones around. And to give you proportion of what it is, so here we have someone walking. The person walking, his name is Dr. Chagi Ben Artzi, and he's one of my teachers. And I've actually been to Bet El a few times with him. He lives there, and he's an expert on Tanakh. And when I met him there once, he said, do you want a tour? I said, of course I want a tour. I'm so honored. I'm so excited to get a tour with you of Bet El. And here you see how wide the wall is. So why out of all the places that Yerovam could make a mikdash, why did he choose Bet El? According to Dr. Chagi Ben Artzi, Yerovam didn't randomly choose Bet El. He chose Bet El because there was a very, very strong tradition of Bet El being a holy place. What's a strong tradition? Yaakov Avinu, he has his dream, and he says, "En zeh ki'im bet Elohim, v'zeh sha'ar hashamayim." He said, "This is the gate of heaven." Now, if Yerovam means to replace Yerushalayim, what better pick than sha'ar hashamayim? So he puts one of his centers in Bet El, and the Jewish people, they don't think it has to do with nothing, because it has to do with Yaakov's dream. So they come here and they feel connected to Yaakov Avinu and his dream and Sha'ar HaShamayim, and it is named Bet El, the house of God. And another interesting thing, the direction of where the mikdash is facing. Now, I wonder on what basis I'm about to say the next sentence, because it's really not built up, but I'm saying it based on the lecture I heard by Dr. Chagi Ben Artzi. He said that the main area of where the mikdash is facing, we would think Yerushalayim. Today, we have a shul. We're going after Yerushalayim. But in fact, that's not the focus. The focus here is something else. The focus here is the site of where Yaakov had his dream, which we're going to see in a minute what it looks like. And it makes sense, because if he's trying to dissuade the people from going to Yerushalayim, then he's not going to have the center be Yerushalayim. Now, I want to poke holes in this theory. How do I know that it's right? How do I know that this is really Yerovam's mikdash? Well, let me ask, if thousands of Jews are coming to this place in Bet El because they think it's a mikdash, what are they bringing with them? Well, they're coming on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and they're bringing korbanot. So I would expect to find a mizbeach. So Ze'ev El-Na'i did a little bit more digging and looking. He didn't have to dig. And said, do we see remains? Do we see remains of a mizbeach? Now, I want you to look over here. So this area over here where my mouse is, this is part of the mikdash. This hill over there, if you see there's more stones, and I'm going to zoom in even more, and you have to use your imagination a little bit because there's growth. Here, all these stones over here are the remains of a mizbeach. What mizbeach? Well, if there's thousands of korbanot, then they need to be given on a mizbeach. And another amazing fact, when they investigated in the area, they found thousands and thousands of bones only from kosher animals. Because when you give korbanot, it needs to be from a kosher animal. So that's another proof that we had an altar here connected to Bnei Israel. And another thing that I want to say is the mizbeach, we barely even identify it. And it's now a pile of stones. How did it turn into a pile of stones? Well, one, over time, things get ruined. And another thing I want to propose is at the end of Sefer Melachim Bet, it says that there was a king, a very good king, named Yoshiyahu Melech. And one of the things that he did, if we see in Pasuk Tedvav, so we just spoke about Yerovam, who made an altar in Bet El. What did Yoshiyahu do? Yoshiyahu destroyed it. So could it be that part of the destruction is because it wasn't meant to, Yoshiyahu came and destroyed it and turned it into a pile of rubble, as we say. And this, I mentioned that the mikdash is not facing Yerushalayim, it's facing another direction. Now, I want to bring you back to this picture because this is the most exciting picture of them all. Based on all of the things that I said, researchers believe that on this flat stone over here, this is where Yaakov had his dream. Now, a few things I want to point out. One, notice how many stones are in the area. What did Yaakov do? He took from the stones in the place and he put it under his head. Well, we see that could very well be because there's a lot of stones in the area. This is a picture of me from 2 years ago, that when I was with Chagi Ben Artzi and he told me, oh, this is Yaakov in his dream, I said, I want to model it. So I had him take a picture of me and I literally lay down on the ground. Now, we don't know which exact side it is. And a lot of times I've been to Bet El and I see people going inside this dome saying this is where Yaakov had his dream. So we know the dome was built later. Now, I want to tell you 2 other proofs for it. I'm standing, this picture I'm taking from here. I'm standing up over here and I'm looking out. And notice that the town is further down. Now, this I never thought of until Chagi told me. He goes, Adele, if Yaakov is running away from Esav and he's stopping in the middle of the night to go to sleep, do you think he's going to a city? Do you think he's going to a town? He's running away from his brother. He doesn't want his brother to know where he is. So most likely he's going to a forest, to the middle of nowhere, away from a town, so people can't find him. And additionally, if you've ever gone camping, when you go camping, you don't want to sleep in between trees all around you because you don't want a snake to crawl on you or a scorpion. You want to try to find an open area because then you have less of a chance that animals are going to be on you. The animals go, they're among the trees. At least when I camp, I like finding an open area. And Yaakov, what area does he pick? Out of this whole, it really seems very logical. You have this whole area with trees and forest, and then we have an area that is, here's another vantage point that you could see how the city is further away. You have this stone that's just empty. Okay. Wait, that we saw already. Okay. Now I want to ask, what is the deeper meaning in identifying the site? So if everything I said is true, and this is in fact the site where Yaakov had his dream, so what? So here's what I think the huge so what is, that if we continue reading Yaakov's dream, Hashem tells him, והנה אנוכי עמך, ושמרתיך בכל אשר תלך, והשיבותיך אל האדמה הזאת, כי לא אעזובך עד אשר אם עשיתי את אשר דיברתי לך. Hashem tells him, I am going to be with you, and I'm going to watch over you wherever you go, and I'm going to return you to this land. I will not leave you until I did what I said to you. Now, the Chachamim say that this promise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Yaakov to watch over him and return him back to Eretz Yisrael, because remember, he was leaving Eretz Yisrael. He's going to Haran to go find a wife. The Chachamim say this promise is not only for Yaakov, it's for all the generations of the Jewish people. And the Chachamim say the Malachim, Olim, and Yordim, what do they represent? They represent all of the nations, all of the empires that conquer the Jewish people. And at the end of the day, Hashem promises, no matter what, I am going to bring you back to Eretz Yisrael. I am going to do exactly what I promised to you. And what greater proof that HaKadosh Baruch Hu fulfills his promise is there than we return to Eretz Yisrael? And more than that, we return to Bet El. And us being in Bet El, we're showing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are witnesses to your promise. You promised something and it came true. And a wonderful, wonderful aspect of the site, they call it Atar Chalom Yaakov, the site of Yaakov's dream. This is the pasuk I just read for you. All along the path, as you're walking down to where he had his dream, you see signs with the pesukim. So imagine how your excitement is building as you're walking down. You could have a Tanakh in hand, but if not, you have it on the signs. And you see them writing pesukim. And every single kid, Jewish kid at least, in school learns about these pesukim. You learn about Yaakov's dream. You need to know it. And now imagine as a kid or even as an adult, you're walking down the path and you see these pesukim. And you're about to get to the place where Yaakov had his dream. And they have a lot of signs of the different pesukim, which is really nice. Also, a side point, they put this pasuk, I never would have thought of it. Later on, Devorah, who's Rivka's meneket, her nurse, she dies. Like it randomly talks about this in the parasha, next week's parasha, and she's buried mitachad lebet el tachat ha'alon, under an alon, an oak tree in Bet El. And we're in Bet El, and there's tons of oak trees all around. So it's also another nice connection. Now, I want to just summarize everything that we said so far. So we started out the class speaking about Sulam Yaakov and saying how amazing in Eretz Yisrael, you could take your kids to the park, you could be on a bus walking down the street, you look out the window, you look in front of you, and you see Yaakov's ladder, and it immediately connects you to the Torah. So the Torah is so alive in Eretz Yisrael. So we started out with that, and we said, what is the big deal with Yaakov's dream? Why did they choose to depict that? And what we tried to figure out is where is the site of his dream. And we opened up with Ze'ev Vilnai, and we said, he asked the local Arab population, do you have a holy site? And they took him to the Maqam Sheikh Abdallah, and in his time, they were still praying there. And then we also noticed, based on how it was built, that there were remains from a Crusader church. So we have a Muslim tradition, a Christian tradition, and then we said, is there a Jewish tradition? Well, first we said there's a nature tradition, because if there's really, really 1,000-year-old trees in the area and that you could see how old they are, Muslims don't cut down trees next to holy sites. So that's further proof. And then we said there's hundreds of burial graves in the area from the Second Temple, and Jews like being buried in holy areas. Plus, we have remains based on dating and the type of building that dates back to the first Beit HaMikdash, which are the same dimensions of the Mishkan. And we have what we believe is the mizbeach. And we see in the Tanakh that Yerovam built his mikdash in Bet El. And it makes sense that he could pick Bet El because of Yaakov's dream. And then we said also the rock that Yaakov chose is big and flat. And the city is further down. And there's tons of little rocks he could pick up and put under his head. It makes sense that this, in fact, this area of Bet El is where Yaakov had his dream. And we concluded with God's promise to Yaakov, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises Yaakov he'll watch over him and bring him back to Eretz Yisrael. And that is, in fact, what God did to us. We see the words of the Pesukim, how true they are. And the last thing I want to conclude with is this is also part of the dream. Hashem is speaking to Yaakov, and he says, Ani Adonai Elohei Avraham Avicha, ve'Elohei Yitzchak, ha'aretz asher ata shochev aleha, lecha et hinenu u'zarecha. That I will, this is the first time that Hashem tells Yaakov, you are getting Eretz Yisrael. So how incredible you could be in the place where the promise of Eretz Yisrael was given to Yaakov, right? And Hashem tells him, your children are going to be like the dust of the earth and are going to spread out in all directions. And we know the Jewish people have spread it all over. And in order for this to be a powerful experience, If Yaakov was in a place with a great view, it could really help him. Well, here he was sleeping, but when he wakes up the next morning, to understand what it means that he's going to get this whole land. And another nice thing, when you go and visit Bet El, right near the rock and the trees and the burial caves, they have this lookout point, which is really, really high. You go up a lot of steps, and you could see in all directions. And as you're looking out, you could really imagine Hashem speaking to Yaakov and saying, this is the land I'm giving to you. And you could connect back to it. So imagine what kind of incredible day you're having. Regular day in Israel, 45 minutes, maybe even less. You could do it in 35. You get to Bet El and you're able to connect in such a deep way to your roots, to the Avot. How often could we say that literally the Avot walked in this land, in this spot? And there's a lot of proofs for it. And to further emphasize, so Bet El was where Yaakov was given the promise of Eretz Yisrael, where he identified the gates of heaven. And if you look over here, this dark blue symbol is the symbol of the community of Bet El. And of course, they're picking a ladder for Yaakov's dream. And it's the place where God's promise comes full circle. And I want to leave you off with a question. How are you going to be part of God's fulfillment to his promise? And I think one of the, maybe not easiest, but one of the strongest ways, you see a little over here, come and visit, and you see these people walking and visiting. Virtue of the fact that you're standing in Bet El, you're showing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are witnesses that you kept your word and you brought us back to Eretz Yisrael. And if that we can't fulfill yet, because it's hard to get here, continuing obviously in the ways of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is another incredible way to be a part of God's promise and be part of Am Yisrael. Thank you so much for joining. If anyone has any questions, I see there's a few things in the chat. I love being here as always, and I hope you will go with your families and visit Bet El. Where did I say the sculpture of the ladder is? So it's in Jerusalem. There's an area called Givat Mordechai. Okay. I see Michal beat me to it. I didn't even have to answer. But yes, it's in Givat Mordechai. You could see the sculpture.
Thank you, Adele. As an Israeli, everything you said was new to me.
Thank you. So honored. Mm-hmm. Thank you for coming. You. I'm so happy to see your name. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Adele.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day.
It's great to hear your classes. You know, I'm not, obviously I don't live in Israel, but the many times I'm there, you really enlighten us to new places all the time. It's great.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited. And people always tell me we did everything. I'm like, you did not do everything, because I didn't do everything. So I'm happy. Bet El, your next trip.
It's very funny that happened years ago. We went for one of my son's bar mitzvahs. We ended up at Sachne Springs. And I don't think it was a popular place on tours so much. And when we got there, my brother, was there all the time, but you know, it was also with his family, you know, yearly, because his father-in-law was from Israel. And he gets there and the bus pulls up and he goes, I've never been here. And we had an amazing day. We were very lucky. It was in November and it was a beautiful day. So it wasn't mobbed with all the people that, you know, come with their barbecues and stuff. So it was very serene and it was amazing. He goes, I've never even heard of this. And we really had a great time. So it was fabulous.
Right. Well, it's incredible. It's an incredible country. It's so small, yet there's so much to do. And there's constantly more things that they're coming up with.
Exactly.
Ellen, I wanted to tell you that when we went olive picking, we passed Bet El, but I knew none of what Adele was just telling us now. And it's olive picking season now, Ellen, if you want to come. And
well, I would love to come. Michal, by the way, that was the highlight of my visit to Israel, that olive picking day that you took us on.
Okay. Waiting for another one.
Yes. As soon as I could get there, we'll be there. When they let me in.
Great.
We miss you all.
Okay. Thank you, Adele.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Adele.
You're welcome. My pleasure.